Hello, my name is Professor Cleverly, and today we're going to talk about themes versus memes. A theme is a musical idea which runs through a piece and can be observed developing and modifying and returning or recapitulating throughout the course of the work. The idea of a theme arose sometime during the Baroque period. We find them, for example, in the fugue subjects of the works of J.S. Bach and others. And throughout the classical, romantic, and modern period, themes have been used as a means of conveying musical meaning across the length of a composition. In contrast, a meme is a dreadful internet joke, used mostly by the younger generation to take a perfectly good motive and basically to snigger at it when any reference to it is heard in any forum whatsoever. The classic example of a musical meme is the lick. A 7-note phrase, a rising scale of 4 notes, followed by a falling arpeggio, and subsequently a return to the opening note. A small, microcosmic musical journey of departure and return. And this particular phrase was noticed amongst jazz musicians in a Facebook group, and examples of its use were juxtaposed in montage form on the website known as YouTube. With the help of some so-called influencers, prominent amongst them one Adam Neely, the lick became a prime example of the musical meme.
So that was a little extract from my new string quartet, the Lick Quartet, in which I basically take the lick seriously. We'll come on to how I did that in a minute, and I'll also talk about some of the unusual rhythmic ideas I used in the piece. But first we need to talk about why. Why use this humorous, or as our professor friend would say, ridiculous internet meme as the basis for a piece? I mean, for many people, the lick is just plain annoying, or even, as one prominent YouTuber told me, something that actually trivializes music. But what do we really mean when we call the lick a musical meme? Well, I recently met up with the Meme King Adam Neely, and we talked about how, in a way, memes are a kind of language.
I mean, honestly, like, memes are like a communication. They're a language, like it's a textured language. Like, trying to explain what the lick is to somebody who doesn't know what the lick is almost feels like you're trying to explain a second language, and you don't get into the nuances of it, you don't get into the feelings of it, you don't get into all those things. But if everybody already knows what it is and everybody hears it, they'll be like, there's this sense that is like a shared community, a shared language among those people who speak that meme. So there's this term that I use all the time called shibboleth. The shibboleth is something that it's a password that's used to identify in-group versus out-group. And this is an easy way that musicians can identify in-group versus out-group. You are a musician if you know the lick and you can play it. And it's not funny or anything else. It's literally an identifier, a cultural signifier. And it's incredibly unhip for me to be explaining all this stuff. But it's like, you know, if somebody doesn't explain it or actually put words to it, then it isn't going to get said.
So a musical meme, like the lick, is recognized by a certain in-group, let's call them group meme, and they take pleasure from spotting it. It's a kind of language, as Adam says, but also a small badge of honor to be, in on it, to understand its significance. And now think for a minute about themes in classical music. Recognizing themes and recognizing how they change and mutate over the course of a piece is one of the key bits of insider knowledge that you kind of need to really appreciate some classical music. It too is a part of the language of that music, and understanding how it works is also in its own way a badge of honour. And just as if you don't speak meme, you won't understand the lick, so if you don't speak theme, you won't really understand as much of classical music. So it's another in-group, let's call these group theme. Now of course there will be some overlap between group meme and group theme. Cool young internet savvy musicians like myself who are interested in both internet culture and classical music. But it's probably a safe bet at least to say that in group theme there will be plenty of people who don't speak meme at all and will have no idea what the lick is. So this struck me as an interesting experiment for a piece, to use a meme as a theme, because how you hear the piece will be different depending on where you find yourself in this Venn diagram. How you hear it will differ depending on whether you speak meme or not, or indeed whether you speak theme or not. And I suppose one of the things I hope most is that some of you who up till now haven't been familiar with the language of theme will find a way in through this piece. So by recognising the meme, you'll start to see how it's used and played around within the piece, how it's used as a theme. So let's look at some examples now. This is the start of the third movement, which has some of the most licky moments. By the way, just listen to that rhythm, 6, 5, 6, 6, 5. Recognise that? It's borrowed from another YouTuber musician I've talked about on the channel before, but we'll come back to that. So that was the first little phrase that sounds quite like the lick. It's major rather than minor, but it's pretty much the same shape as the lick. It has the same overall rhythm and contour. Here it is again. To me it feels quite recognisable as the lick, even though the actual intervals are slightly different. And then, just like our London buses, you wait around for a long time, and then 3 of them come along at once. And then on the second violin, that's this guy, the wonderful Brian Lee, the first full statement of the lick using the actual intervals. We'll jump ahead a few bars now. This is one of my favourite passages, partly because of how that dancing melody with a dotted rhythm sits over the 6-5-6-6-5 pattern. But also because if you listen to the lower instruments, you can hear that they're churning out a wonky rhythmic lick over and over. And then we have what I think of as the Edgar Meyer section. Next you can really hear the 2 parts of the lick broken up. There's the first part, the scale, overlapping with itself, and then interruptions from that da-da-da, the last part of the lick. I guess splitting up a theme like this into its component parts is a fairly common practice in classical music. And here you can really hear lots of overlapping licks in the violins, creating a sort of minimalist texture. And then we have a repeat of that earlier bit because, well, I just like it. There's the whining cat moment. And all the time we have that 6-5-6-6-5 pattern underneath. And then after a little mystery, one final triumphant lick to end with. So before we move on, let's just come back to that 6-6-5-6-5 rhythm. It may surprise you to learn that the starting point for that rhythm is this beat. That's Jacob Collier's With Love in My Heart, which sort of sounds like it's in a 5-4 bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But here in June Lee's transcription, you can see it's actually slightly wonky with those mixtures of 6 and 5 16th notes. So I pulled out that rhythm and started playing around with it, and that became the basis for this whole third movement. And like I said in the video on Jacob, I used to get ideas from classical composers like Ligeti or Thomas Alice, so it's both weird and delightful to find inspiration from such a different source. So I called this movement Jacob's Lick. Before we come back to the idea of the lick itself, there's one more quite similar wonky rhythm that I want to talk about that forms the basis for much of the opening movement. And like the Jacob Collier example, this kind of emerged out of research I'd been doing for a previous video here on YouTube. Here's the rhythm in its purest form. So this is a 7/8, 4 plus 3. But every 5 lots of 7, which is 35 eighth notes in total, and keep that number in mind, there's an extra 1 eighth note before we're jolted back to the beginning of the cycle. So this one is inspired by Tigran Hamasyan's music. The idea that really struck me when I was researching his music was the idea that a polyrhythm didn't necessarily have to complete its whole cycle. You could actually make a slightly shorter cycle by starting a polyrhythm but then slicing it off somewhere along the way. So here was the example we saw from Hamasyan's Double Faced, where a pattern of 5 plays across a number of 4/4 bars, but it's then cut off once the 4/4 framework completes, and it causes this weird jolt at the end of the cycle. So in my piece there's a second overarching rhythm which is 2 bars of 9/4. Now these complete after 36 eighth notes. Now you remember the 5 lots of 7/8 made 35, so there's that 1 extra eighth note left over. So to make that polyrhythm come alive, of course, we need a sense of that 9/4 bar, which is what emerges from the melodic line above. Just to make things even more tangled, that melody itself has a sense of groups of 3, the da 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 da, which creates a bit more polyrhythm. So there's a lot of rhythmic complexity going on, but it adds up to what sounds like a nice folk melody with an unusual, quirky rhythm beneath it. If the lick as a meme, as a concept, does have a problem, it's that once you're aware of it, you start to hear it everywhere. The very thing I've taken advantage of, the lick's memorability, is the thing some see as its problem.
For somebody who gets the joke, they will be paying attention to that development because you can't not hear it. It's like you cannot not hear.
Yeah.
Like this is one of the things. Like you will be like musician buddies or whatever will be like hanging out and like there'll be music playing in the background and then the lick will slip in. It's like immediately everybody's ears perk up. It's like wait, the lick is present. Okay, the worst time I ever did it, I can tell you the worst time I ever licked. Well, I did this arrangement of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," and along to the original lyrics of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," which are a lot darker than the ones that like Frank Sinatra popularized. The original lyrics are "Have yourself a merry little Christmas. It may be your last. Next year we'll all be living in the past." It's about like a family moving away, and basically it's from a musical called Meet Me in St. Louis. And I wrote this very like lush string quartet arrangement where like a singer and rhythm section, and I felt like there was this one moment with the lick as a musical moment I felt like would work really, really well. And then so I'm like, oh, should I do it and should I do it not? And I included it because I thought musically it worked really well. But the problem was, and I feel dirty about it to this day, it took away from the meaning of the lyrics and the song and everything. It made no sense within the context of that arrangement. It just worked because I needed some kind of melodic material that was relatively stepwise or whatever, and like a counter melody or something like that. So it's like you have to know what it is. You're playing with fire whenever you're using it, at least for me, because all of those other connotations and all that extra meaning that comes along with it always goes with it. It's like you can't just quote something randomly, not expecting the connotation. Like shaving a haircut is humorous. Like if you include that in a piece of music, it's going to be funny. You can't do that in like some kind of dirge and expect it to not be taken very poorly.
And in a funny way, that's kind of what happened with this quartet, and this may surprise some of you. It wasn't something that I started out writing thinking I'm going to use the lick as the basis for an entire piece. I didn't go into it that way around. I'd already written sketches for all 4 of the movements, and what happened was I was writing part of what's now the 4th movement, and I sketched a phrase which was basically very similar to the lick. And then one of those evil voices just popped into the back of my head. You could call this the Lick Quartet and make it all about the lick. So I looked through the sketches I had, and to my surprise, there were fragments all over the place that, often with only the tiniest of tweaks, could be made to seem like licks. I guess it has a lot to do with the very simple, almost elemental materials that the lick is made from, the scale and the arpeggio, as Professor cleverly pointed out.
A rising scale of 4 notes, followed by a falling arpeggio.
So it's pretty easy to find a lick in almost anything. But to me, the lick as a concept is not something I find particularly damaging to music. I think it's very rarely as bad as Adam's experience, where it ruins an entire piece or an entire section of a piece of music. There are other examples of musical jokes that are much more damaging. As a student, we used to joke about phrases like, "it's nearly over," which matches the main subject of the finale of a famous violin concerto. I won't tell you which one because I don't want to ruin it for you. And that, in a way, is much worse because it affects the whole movement. Most of the time, the lick is nothing more than just a passing in-joke snigger. Interestingly, I think my quartet still has a few of those snigger moments when the pure lick just jumps out to those of us who speak its language, that very end of the 3rd movement being one of them. But as we've seen, there are also a whole range of them that are more buried or written in theme language, which are much less humorous. Well, I say that, but actually it depends. That's what's fascinating. I've heard the piece twice now, and at the world premiere in Dallas I had the sense that there were few from group Meme in the audience, and I honestly listened to my own piece and I thought, I didn't really include as much of the lick as I remember. And then in Amsterdam for the 2nd performance there were more people from group Meme present, and suddenly I listened with their ears and I heard every single passing reference. The piece just seemed to be full of licks. So to that extent, this little experiment of playing with memes turned out to be really quite interesting. The performance in Amsterdam that I'm showing clips from here was really one of those exceptional moments for me when everything came together. I'd managed to write a piece which I was pretty happy with, which is really hard enough in itself. And then it was played by the Dover Quartet, who really are a very special group, and I know they worked tremendously hard on what is a very challenging piece. And finally, the Concertgebouw, who co-commissioned the piece with the Dallas Chamber Music Society, allowed me to film and record the concert, which just happened to be a nigh-on perfect rendition of the piece. And my plan is to post that full video in a few days' time. I do hope you'll check it out. So thank you very much to the Dover Quartet and to Adam Neely, and thank you particularly to my patrons on Patreon who really do make this channel possible. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.